Well, with that, thank you, everyone. We will call today, Wednesday, October 13th, 2021, Infrastructure Committee meeting to order. Welcome committee members, staff, and guests that are present with us, also online or on the phone. For anyone that is joining us in the room or online, please be sure to mute your phones. That would be appreciated. Thank you. And with that, we'll move to number 2, public comment. Any person that is wishing to address the committee today, please do state your name, address, and the topic you're here to speak about. And currently, we have Kevin Clint and Judy Pankarzinski. And just a question, Joel, online, are you interested in providing public comment?
Yes, I would like to.
All right, thank you. So with that, we will start with Kevin. You may come up to the front, Kevin.
Thank you. Kevin Clint, 126765 State Highway 153 in Stratford. Again, we're here on behalf of the River Rats for opening the county roads and extending the hours for ATV and UTV traffic. You guys were concerned about the safety aspects. We actually looked into some of the machines that we actually have, and they've been starting to put LED lights on the back end of them and on the front of them since before 2010 to help make them a little bit more visible. They're actually more visible than most cars and motorcycles are today. We're still having the issues of the same farmers and everything else running the same roads that we already have, especially with the Amish and these little bicyclists and everything that way. We're just looking for corridors to go from place to place. We're not looking for traveling on Highway C to all the way through it. We'd actually like to take the back roads. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Next, we'll have Judy Pankarzinski, please.
Good morning, everybody. It's me, Judy Pankarzinski, 226690 Blue Jay Lane, Ringgold, Wisconsin, 54471. Pretty much like what Kevin had said, that as far as safety aspects go, the newer style ATVs and UTVs do have pretty bright lights on them. But I wanted to address a couple of things on the ordinance options that you had. Everybody's concerned with the 1,500 miles or 1,500 cars a day level. I would be comfortable with saying that most people would like it even a little bit lower. We could go to the 1,250 or even the 1,000. It would encompass the rural areas more than you know, the 1,500 comes kind of into the metropolitan area a little bit sometimes. So I think most riders would accept the further outlying ones. The hours of operation, I'd like to see to 11 instead of 10, which was written into the ordinance. And I know Jim and I had talked about a couple of the areas that we could probably open for use just to connect some on even some of the busier highways. So just a couple of items that I wanted to address. And otherwise, it's the same old story from me, is I think we need to have some of the county roads open so we have more accessibility to where we want to go. Because we have a lot of dead-end roads or roads that meet up with county roads and then connect another quarter mile down the road to another town road. So we do need some of the county ones open. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And next, we'll have Joel Ponchak, and Joel is with us on the phone.
Hello, good morning. Joel Ponchak, 201131 Hidden Cove Lane, Mosinee, Wisconsin, 54455. I'm just going to echo the same comments that you just heard. I'm actually a member of the Lost Trail Riders Club in Auburndale, although I am a Marathon County resident. I fully support opening county roads. I'd like to be able to get out of my driveway without putting my rig on a trailer. Obviously, there's some safety concerns, but if people are following the rules and the laws that are in place, that really lessens the possibility of injury on these types of vehicles. I see people riding bicycles and walking along county roads, and you can't tell me that that's any safer than riding an ATV with LED headlights and taillights on it. So I just wanted to kind of echo those comments from the other people and say that I would appreciate it if you would pass the amendment as proposed. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joel. Do we have another caller that is? All right, so we have another individual on the line of, it's a phone number ending in 84. Could you please identify yourself, and are you interested in providing public comment?
Hi, this is Tom Loveland, the Forest Administrator for Marathon County. No, I don't have any public comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tom. All right, so with that, we will close the public comment period. Thank you, everyone that participated. We'll move on to number 3, approval of the minutes of the August 5th, 2020 Infrastructure Committee meeting. These minutes were in your packet for your review. Are there any additions, corrections? Supervisor Robinson?
Move to approve.
We have a motion. We have a second from Supervisor Christensen. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, any opposed? All right, thank you. Now we will move to number 4, policy issues discussion and potential committee determination. A, approval of decision-making process for 28th Avenue corridor and consideration to forward to the county board. And we will have Commissioner Griesbach and Administrator Leonard team on this.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So this framework is really a product of your conversations that you've had over the last several meetings regarding 28th Avenue staff. Really, the purpose in putting this together is really just to make sure we understand the process that you envision for us to utilize, the context that you ask or you're asking us to have, and make sure that there's consistency, not only here at this committee, but also a shared understanding at the county board level of what that process looks like, because there are a number of different municipalities that would be impacted, as well as the MPO. So on page 4 of your packet is the proposed decision-making process overview that we put together based on, again, the feedback that you provided, the insight you provided over your last several meetings. So the first item that we've already started to move forward on is really to facilitate meetings with the city of Wausau, the village of Maine, and the MPO. And our thought process here is that we're going to engage those municipalities and actually seek formal action from both the city of Wausau and the village of Maine. And now you see laid out on this document what that action is. So the issue, again, with the city of Wausau is the city interested in acquiring a portion of the property for 28th Avenue upgrades. And we're looking for formal actions from the city council expressing interest or lack of interest in that property. Jim has already started to reach out. We've reached out to the city on a number of occasions. And my understanding is they are having a meeting of their appropriate subordinate body in the near future. November 9th. Thanks, Jim. Similarly, with respect to the Village of Maine, I won't go through the same information, but we're essentially seeking similar action there. Following action from those two bodies, and some of this, of course, is going to be done concurrently, the county board is going to have to make determinations relative to maintaining the corridor. So the pre-work that staff are doing right now, we're working to obtain that 2050 transportation sustainability study from North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning. And the reason for that is that the project, that 28th Avenue corridor, is discussed, as I understand it, is going to be discussed in that study. And in speaking with Dennis Lawrence, we can expect to have a draft of that in the relatively near future. My recollection is within a month. Is that right, Jim? Yeah.
We're trying to set up a meeting, I think, right now, November 1st. We're sitting down with them.
So that will be done. We'll also obtain any other information that you indicate to us at this committee level and the full county board to make sure you have all of the requisite information before you to make the policy decision you need to make in the near future. And we'll report to you on, and the county board, on the action taken by those municipal bodies above. The next step is formal action by the Infrastructure Committee, and as I laid out the options based on my consideration of your discussions, I think there are, right now, I see three potential recommendations that the committee would make to the county board. One is to maintain the corridor map in its current state. Two is to direct staff to work to transfer county-owned property to the appropriate municipalities for their use for roadway improvements. And again, that's determinative based on the formal action taken by each of those bodies. And the last option is to direct staff to divest property through public sale. Thinking through how your county board ordinance, or your county board rules are currently set up, this is a suggestion that I would make. Certainly, it's not required, but formal action by your HR, Finance, and Property Committee, the jurisdiction of that committee certainly covers property that is maintained and owned by the county, and certainly it's going to likewise have an impact on county finances and staff work to do that. So I thought that was an appropriate action. However, again, this is just a suggestion put together by staff. And then last is formal action by the County Board of Supervisors, and I had those same three recommendations relative to staff proceeding based on the action taken by the board. And then, of course, I, as the administrator, would direct staff to affect the will of the board. So that's the framework that we laid out. If we're missing anything, please let us know. And speaking with Jim, we think this is, again, a good opportunity. Have the discussion here and then forward it on to the board so that the full board understands the process that we'd be utilizing here. And I'll be very upfront with you. I don't think we've ever had to do this before. This is, we have a corridor map for future planning. This map has been in existence for a great many years, and we've been working, as you all know, to acquire that property. We haven't had experience, I certainly haven't had experience in how to divest property that has been acquired based on a corridor map. So this was our best effort to lay out that what that framework looks like, the process.
All right, thank you, Administrator. Supervisor Robinson.
Administrator Letter, the only add-on that I would suggest is that we have been looking for a new facility for combined parks and highway. And I would ask that as part of our planning process, we have considered the Witter property. Do we have any interest in any portion of that corridor for potential future county operations, particularly in that 28th Avenue Highway U area? I know that's come up in the past, so I would just ask that we make sure that we don't have any interest in expanding right-of-way in that very narrow area near that potential acquisition if we move ahead with the new facility.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions of the Administrator or Commissioner Griesbach? All right, so at this time, Administrator, Commissioner, are you looking for an action from the board on this? What do you need from the committee today?
We set it up so that you could take action if you felt as though this decision-making framework was appropriate. You could forward it on to the county board. I don't know that it's required that you do so, but this, in my estimation, this is a pretty significant decision that has long-term implications for the county. So I think it makes sense to do that, but of course, that's the prerogative of the committee.
All right, Supervisor Robinson.
I would move that we adopt the decision-making framework with the insertion of the language relative to a review of the 28th Avenue corridor for future county facility expansion.
All right, so we have a motion. Is there a second? We do have a second. Any further discussion? If not, Supervisor.
John, could you
Christensen.
just explain that motion to me a little better, okay, please?
Well, We have looked at the Witter property as a potential expansion for highway and others. In discussions with the Village of Maine and others, there have been discussions of potentially upgrading 28th Avenue, and I think our responsibility would be in that area from you to through that property. I would hate to have us abandon any property or anything that we might find as an interest in as we do that planning. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of not as a county trunk highway, but rather as an access to a county-owned facility. It doesn't make sense for us to abandon right-of-way or to abandon plans that we may in the future need to go back and redo. And that's the reason for inserting that provision.
All right.
Thank you.
Supervisor Johnson.
There we go. One of the things, since John, you brought up that joint facility that's kind of in the works in the Witter Farm and maybe in the works, who the heck knows? But one of the issues that we've had with the Village of Maine is they're wanting either payment in lieu of taxes or some kind of compensation for that. Now, if we did sell the parcels that are now Marathon County land, that would add to their tax base in the items that are in the Village of Maine, would it not? You know, the parcels that are in the Village of Maine, wouldn't that add to their tax base?
I'm trying to recall the parcels that we have purchased in the Village of Maine. I believe there's only two, one's a very small facility.
Okay. Well, I was just wanted to consider whether or not that would somewhat offset their loss of the taxes from the Witter Farm if we ever do get to proceed on that.
There's only one small parcel, probably about.
Okay, so
200
not
feet.
really a factor. Okay, thank you.
Okay, were there any further questions or discussion? If not, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Opposed. Okay, and we have one opposed. Motion passes with, but with dissension. Thank you. And with that, we're going to be moving on to number 5, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. A, consideration of draft amendments to section 7.125 ATV, UTV ordinance. And we will once again have Administrator Leonard and Commissioner Griesbach lead this discussion.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So in your packet, you have a couple of draft amendments to the existing ordinance. And thank you to Corporation Counsel and staff, Jim, for putting those together. But I just wanted to kind of go through, and I wasn't able to attend the meeting prior to your last very short meeting, but give a little bit of background as to each of the amendments in the proposed amendments in the packet. So what does the your discussion, we've tried to capture that discussion within those proposed amendments, and those proposed amendments begin on page 7 of the packet. And what I want to start with what this will trigger us to do. So the county board acts through, of course, policy determinations, one of those being ordinances. And staff then, as your administrator, I will work with staff to affect the will of the board as demonstrated by that any amendment to any ordinance that you approve. So the first proposed amendment, I'll call it option 1, just for clarity's sake, again, begins on page 7. That captures the discussion that you've had over the last several meetings. And really, essentially what it does is it moves us away, it abandons this previous application process that we had utilized, whereby individuals would make application relative to segments of the county highway system to the commissioner, the highway commissioner. Jim and his staff would then evaluate each application based on the criteria that was within the application form that was developed in the previous board term with discussions with this committee and formally approved by the county board. It moves us away from that criteria-based system where we looked at things like average daily traffic, we looked at road segment length, heavy vehicle traffic, and a number of other things. But it moves us away from that to the system you see in front of us, which is that the designation of county highways takes place if they meet the following criteria, and there are two. What we heard was 1,500 vehicles per day or less, and the segment lies outside of the Wausau Metropolitan Planning Organization planning boundaries. If it meets those, it is designated as open. The role of the highway commissioner changes to that biannual review to determine which segments meet those criteria, and the ability to really designate what are segments. That's the discretionary authority then that Jim would have. How to break up the highway system into segments to then evaluate under the criteria that are set forth in sections 4A1 and 4A2. There are also some changes in option 1. Of course, the hours of operation that you discussed, it moves it until, I believe, 5 to midnight. And the rest of the modifications are really, at least in my estimation, housekeeping changes to make sure that we're in compliance with any other necessary statutes. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 was developed at the request of a member of the committee, and I asked staff to put that together, and that begins on page Option 2 begins on page 18. And what that, again, it adopts, it moves us away from the criteria-based application process where essentially the default was that segments are closed until they're opened by the commissioner. It still moves us to this default where the segments are ultimately opened by action by the highway commissioner, but it inserts a public safety evaluation. So it's an additional exercise of discretion. And you'll see that under section 4B, where it talks about public safety exception. If during the biannual review of county highways, as in subsection A above, the highway commissioner determines that public safety necessitates that a highway segment be open or closed to ATV, UTV traffic, the commissioner may open or close that highway segment to ATV, UTV traffic in his or her discretion. The highway commissioner may consider the volume of traffic on the segment, the need to provide a safer connection between existing routes, the frequency of traffic incidents on the segment, the input of law enforcement, citizen input, or other factors relevant to public safety. So it essentially, it still changes the default, where the default is to be that a segment is open, but it allows a discretionary exercise that it's to be open unless any of these factors exist in the opinion of the highway commissioner. And again, in some sense, I think it's a reasonable analogy to make, it returns some of that criteria-based process that exists in our current system, where Jim would not only do the evaluation, but he'd reach out to the Parks, Rec, and Forestry Director, he'd reach out to the Sheriff's Office. So at the request of a member, that was offered as well. The other change that's made is the, as Judy referenced in her public comment, the hours of operation, there was a request to reduce that from midnight to 10 p.m., as you'll see on page 21. So those are the two options that were formally, Jim, do you have something to add?
Yeah, there was also, we added that the vehicle should ride in, another request was the vehicle should ride in single file, far right side. We added that also.
Okay, thank you.
And I could add an example, I can give an example for the discretion one. A good example is actually when Kevin and I sat down and took a look at the map, for those who are familiar on the west side, Highway H going through Edgar, the traffic volumes are very high in that northern portion of Highway H. in my discretion, I felt it's best to keep that segment open and not close it, because otherwise we're forcing the UTVs, ATVs to go farther west and cross Highway 29 at grade. So, that's part of the discretion. In the first option, I want to have that discretion and say, let's keep that segment open, because I've done it myself. It's not really fun crossing Highway 29, so I feel it's safer to go across. So those are some of the reasons for discretion.
Thanks, Jim. So those are the two options that you have in your packet. The last thing that I wanted to reference is, I appreciate the work of the committee in conversations with Chair Seiler. I wanted to offer another potential consideration should you wish to have it, and that is the county board does have $800,000 approximately in its contingency fund for this year. This is as an ATV, UTV outsider, my perspective, this is a complex issue. We spent a lot of time just a couple of years ago putting in place a system, and I understand that there are significant changes that there's a desire to have made. Another potential opportunity you may have, should you find it valuable, is to allocate perhaps $50,000 for a formulation of a task force to look into this, to bring together a recommendation to the board with a date certain, come back with a plan by April 1st to accomplish some of the things Judy and others have spoken about. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but I want to make sure as your administrator you have an understanding of the available options that are in front of you today, but also a recommendation that you could bring those people together and ask for essentially a task force to balance the concerns that Scott Parks raised, some of the concerns that Jim's raised, and some of the concerns that certainly members of the public and members of the committee have raised about what's the right path of action. So that's really the overview I wanted to provide, but again, essentially this is a policy, the ordinance is a policy decision for the board.
Okay. Thank you, Administrator. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe we're making this a little bit more difficult than it has to be, because we have a very clear map in front of us that took into account your concerns, Highway Commissioner, about crossing Highway 29, and I see that Edgar is not, it's open. Highway H is, correct? So I think we could simplify this a bit by adopting the map as the official list of ATV routes, while retaining the ability of the Highway Commissioner to review on the semi-annual basis, and also in there, the Highway Commissioner has the authority to temporarily close, terminate, or modify routes if conditions require such a temporary action. And if that was necessary, if we had a problem somewhere, it could be addressed, then brought to the full board for modification. Permanent modification. So I think there's a mechanism in there, but I think it'd be a lot clearer to folks if we just said, this is the map we're adopting. These are the general criteria we used, while also taking into account, as in the case in Edgar, a common sense approach to safety. So there is that one segment, it's over 1,500, but it's on the map as approved because it makes sense. So is there a way just to do that? Mr. Administrator?
I'll kick to Corp Council at some point, but in terms of process, any proposed ordinance revision you have that is approved here today would go through, at the very least, the county board. I think also your rules do allow that another committee could take up the issue to discuss it as well if it's within their jurisdiction. However, they cannot stop the action of one committee to move it to the full board. So in terms of process, it would have to go to the full board. If you approve a map, I guess I'm struggling a little bit with the question, because as I read the first ordinance, option one, Jim wouldn't have the authority to open a section that is over 1,500 cars. In your comments, I infer that you appreciate some level of discretion. That only exists in option two. So there are distinct differences between the two. And those discretionary things just, as I read it, don't exist in option one. I'm happy if Corp Counsel has an opinion different than I.
Oh, okay. I agree with that, Administrator Leonard, and I would just note, I think in both options, there is a provision that requires publication of the routes in a map format like Supervisor Johnson, you're suggesting. I think if the board were to pass and approve either of those revisions, the result would be that the commissioner would be required to publish a map that would outline what the routes are. So I think what these two proposed revisions also do is set out the criteria behind making those maps, which I think is probably something that we're going to need to do. But the result would also be a map would be created.
All right, Supervisor Robinson?
One of the advantages of having the ordinances is the appeal, is the appeal. And I think you need the process because you have multiple levels of appeal. You've got the highway commissioner, and the people can then take it to the county administrator. And I would imagine that, consistent with most decisions made in government, you could take it to circuit court. Should you want to appeal it, you would need the criteria. So I think that's one of the reasons why you need to have it. And we adopt maps for districts, but there's a basis for that. So I would encourage us to look to the ordinance and the language.
All right. Supervisor, Administrator.
Just one, Supervisor Robinson brought up the issue of appeal, and that is within both of the proposals. If you specifically look at page 8, based on the comments that you made at a previous meeting, we also have a section in there that allows for the County Board of Supervisors to rescind or modify the designation of a route by enactment of an ordinance, essentially doing that, because that's what we heard you say. That is different than the process that we use in a lot of other areas, which is just as what Supervisor Robinson referenced, which is the appeal process through Wisconsin statute, which following, in this instance, our ordinance would dictate the highway commissioner makes a determination, a discretionary determination, or I should say a determination. I then review that through the appeal process. If an individual is still aggrieved and wishes to appeal further, there are Wisconsin statutes that allow them, as Supervisor Robinson indicated, to appeal in a couple of fashions. One could be through a use of an administrative appeal, and we have designated hearing officers that on occasion for various things hear those, or they can appeal through circuit court based on the nature of the appeal. But this is different. We added the authority of the county board, again, based on the discussion we believed you had.
All right. Supervisor Johnson is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I'm trying to get at is the ordinance language, I believe in both option A and B, would preclude the map from being used around the Edgar area because it doesn't meet the 1,500, it's over the 1,500 threshold. So if it's safer to have that, that's all I'm trying to get at is a way to include the safer route. So perhaps an amendment to the criteria to allow above 1,500 when deemed to be safer than having it closed. That would be safer for it to be open. And how you get there really doesn't matter to me. But I just want the safest route there.
That's what
Could be in there.
that's what option 2 does. It gives me.
That's
that.
what option 2 does, because my read of it didn't quite get me there. But thank you.
Supervisor Christensen, did you have a comment?
Let Supervisor Dickinson go first.
Okay, Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair. So my first question is, when did option 2 end up in our packet? Because did that occur after last week's meeting? Was that in the packet prior to last Thursday's meeting that was canceled?
No, that was a request that came from a member of the committee after last Thursday's meeting to include it
After
in the.
the last Thursday's meeting, which wasn't a meeting?
Correct.
Okay. So there was discussion after a meeting, when there wasn't a meeting, about making another option?
A member of the committee reached out to staff, myself, and requested that we prepare an alternative amendment to the amendment that was proposed.
Were we emailed that there was any, were we informed of a change, the addition of an option at all?
No, it was just included in the meeting packet.
Okay. So my point is, I wasn't expecting to see option B this morning when I showed up, because I had no indication that there would be an option B. Because when we left the meeting last month, our actual meeting, where we had a vote on a proposal about how we wanted to move forward, we made specific requests about what should be proposed, what should be written up, how it should be carried forward. We did not ask for multiple options. We asked for the county administration to bring forth what we had asked, which was less than 1,500 hours 5 to 12. That's what we asked for. So pardon me for being a little, insert whatever word you want to show here, that now we are discussing an additional option or a different consideration after we gave, I thought, as a committee, a route forward. So I'm sorry, let me finish on that. I just understand my frustration with that. I'm not saying that another committee member can't offer up another solution, another possibility. But it seems to be is after comments that were made last Thursday in a meeting that wasn't a meeting, we now, because of safety, we have this addition of 4B, and then we have the change to 10 p.m. from 12 a.m. And my comment is I'm just a little disappointed that no one was informed of that.
I appreciate that perspective. I'll just let you know, as you indicated, my thought process was that an individual supervisor could, as you indicated, offer an amendment on the floor. And I appreciate the perspective that the process, you have concerns about the process. My judgment was giving you it in writing in advance of a proposed amendment that was going to come may be more helpful, but I appreciate the feedback that I should have sent an email earlier letting you know that that was coming. So thank you.
Administrator, we have Supervisor Christensen's in queue.
Madam Chair, do we have a motion before the board right now, or no? I would like to make a motion that we go with option 2. I think that's got just about everything in there that we are looking for. I think the administrator still needs some pull over this. I mean, be able to open and close roads.
This one away. God.
That need to be open more, like that Highway H. Sure, it's not on the, it's over 1,500, but I think just about everything is in there that we would like. So I will make a motion that we approve option 2.
Supervisor Robinson? Okay, I'm sorry, Supervisor, we have a motion and a second, and I see Supervisor Johnson had his hand up for discussion. Oh, okay, so we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Supervisor Dickinson?
I don't see why we're moving to 10 p.m., so I don't agree with that whatsoever. It should be what we had discussed last month, which was 5 a.m. to 12 a.m. I'll make that comment. I did have some questions. I do like the idea of having an exemption process. There were 2 county segments that were brought up to me by residents, which I forwarded to the chair, and I forwarded to the to Mr. Griesbach. And that was about County E and County C. The County E segment, which falls outside of the 1500, has McMillan Marsh, which precludes travel off of Man Road to through County E. And so having an exemption process is a good thing. I think part of that exemption process shouldn't rely around this quote-unquote idea of public safety, because to me that just seems like a shutdown process. It should be talking with the residents that should be who are affected, whether they want to open up an area. That should be the focus. Okay. To me, it seems like the way that the paragraph is written, just reading it now, it seems like we can have these discussions in an office because people say, well, there was an accident on that road and we want to shut it down. And it isn't to say that Mr. Griesbach would be doing that. Who's the person after Mr. Griesbach who just decides that, well, public safety, yeah, so we're gonna propose that we shut that down. So again, I just read it now, so I'm trying to process what I'm reading there. I like the exemption, but without having read it further, my apologies for not being on top of the packet. I guess that's on me. So I do have concern with that, but I like opening it up, and I think County E and County C, which I emailed, I think are important. And 4A3 of the initial option, not looking at option 2, but the option 1, I did have a paragraph or have a sentence that could be added in there that the segment would be added as an exemption, so I'm glad for that. Also in item 4D of that, they talk about, and you had mentioned it before, about modifying a road or changing a designation. I didn't know if the word added should be in there, but I don't know where that is in option 2 for me to go ahead and review that. So I apologize for rambling on, but the way I see it, we are adding layers of more government. Well, I'm sorry that you can feel how you feel. This is how I feel. You add layers and layers of review and exemption, and instead of just opening up the county to allow for the free movement of people. And now we want to talk about appeals process and bringing up a statute and all this. We're going way beyond this, talking about task force, going way beyond this. Speaking to this specific motion, option 2, I would propose an amendment to that we move it back to 12 a.m.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on an amendment. Any further discussion on that? Supervisor Robinson.
Well, the mystery person requesting that was myself, based upon discussions that Judy and I were having with Sheriff Parks and others, and just a request to try to get something that would appease the concerns that law enforcement had raised, and to adopt a rational policy. And this is democracy, and people have the right through the democratic process to introduce changes. And while you may be concerned about it coming forth, it is appropriate for us to have options, and that's part of the deliberative process that makes hopefully the end product a little bit stronger. I am concerned about going to midnight from a public safety perspective. Those were concerns that were expressed by law enforcement. I intend to oppose the change to take it to midnight. I think that gives you the ability to move people around in a timely manner between 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. And from a public safety perspective, I have concerns over the midnight.
All right. Supervisor Johnson, and we do to have Supervisor Gums on the line. So Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, when I look at that exemption thing and looking at the segments that were referenced on Highway C and Highway E, there are alternate routes there, whereas with Highway H, there are not alternate routes safe routes available. So I think it's reasonable having the 1,500 count. I just think it's a very reasonable way to approach it. The hours of operation, I mean, the UTVs are not by design, not meant to be a primary mode of transportation. Otherwise, they'd be licensed and insured like a truck or a car is. So I think it's reasonable to stick with the 10. I would be fine with the 11, as Judy mentioned. But like when I was a kid, my parents told me nothing good happens after midnight. So let's keep it to a reasonable hour. It still expands it greatly. And this removes layers of bureaucracy to get approval for a little segment here, a little segment there. This is a quantum leap forward in opening up the county from what we've had before. And I think we should get it done. It can always be tweaked if there are issues here or there, if circumstances change one way or the other, where it's maybe a good idea to open up more, maybe it's a good idea not to. We don't know. We can't see into the future, just like the 28th corridor. It's been in the plan for 30 years and it just didn't work out. Circumstances change. But I think we should take action. I do like option B because it gives the flexibility to do common sense things. So I will be supporting that, and thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. And we have Supervisor Gums on the line. Supervisor?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I got locked out for a while Supervisor Dickinson was talking. Sorry, but I am for the midnight thing, and I thought we're just talking about that amendment right now, actually.
We are.
You know, the horse of the Amish go by here at any time of night. If we're going to shut down one group, then we should be shutting down that group because it's, I still feel they're just as dangerous, if not more so, than the ATVs. And they go at any time of day. 5 to midnight is no problem for me, and I'd vote for that.
All right, thank you. Are there any further comments? Supervisor Dickinson?
There are other counties that are open 24/7. There's no reason we can't open it till 12. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to take this opportunity to make some comments as well. As a county committee, and we do have a role to be aware of and support the county's 3 overarching goals of being the healthiest, the safest, and the most prosperous. And we have heard, and I truly appreciate all the public input on the economic benefit, the prosperity that this could bring to the county. And that's why, personally, I was very intrigued by what Administrator Leonard had proposed about a task force to take a look at a comprehensive plan that could interact with neighboring counties to really look at tourism long-term and create a trail system which wouldn't happen overnight. But just like the snowmobile trails, that it took a bit, and now there are nice trails that do promote economic development. It keeps everyone happier, healthier, it's safer, and it's something to consider. So that is something that I personally think would be a really good idea, to have people who are experts take a look at that. But back to this discussion. All right, so we have an amendment on the floor, and the last call for any further discussion on the amendment. And just to be very clear, Supervisor Dickinson, can you restate the amendment so everyone is your amendment, so we're all clear on it after all the discussion?
The amendment I have to option 2 was to change it from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. to 12 a.m. From 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. is the only change
Okay.
that I offered.
All right, and that was seconded by Supervisor Christensen. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
So that was 2 aye. Any opposed? Aye. Okay, so we have 3. Richard, Supervisor Gums, did we have your vote?
Yeah, well, Madam Chair, will you run a roll call vote, please?
That's a
We're
good
having
idea.
time.
All right, Kendra, could you take the roll on this, please? All right, so,
Dickinson,
Yes.
Johnson,
No.
Gums,
Yes.
Robinson,
No.
Christensen,
Yes.
Styler.
no. So, because we are right now at a 6-member committee, the county rules do state that a tie vote means that this effort fails. So thank you for your consideration on that. So now we'll move back to Supervisor Dickinson.
So back to option 2 then. I have a question about the public safety exception. Is the intent of that only public safety, or would that include appeals about because I noticed you have 4B that says public safety exception, you have 4D that says appeal. So an exemption to the 1,500, does that fit into either one of those? Meaning that a highway segment that would be above 1,500, like a County C or a County E, is there an opportunity in this for someone to bring forth like an ATV club?
Are you able to speak to that, Administrator?
Convenient that the Corp Council is out of the meeting right now. Let me just take a moment to read appeal, any determination.
Supervisor?
And just to kind of add to that, because there's a mention of the biannual review, and it almost says like, well, we're going to have a biannual review, and every 2 years we can review this based upon some safety or something, and then someone can appeal. It doesn't seem like there's something in there for someone to say, can we also have additions to that besides just the exception? That's all.
I think, if I may, as I read, I think that's a series of 2 very good questions. On the second one, I'm more clear that at any period, there's no limitation on one's ability to file an appeal, whether it's the day after the biennial review or 2 years or a year and 6 months, and they can file the appeal with the administrator. The clarity I have with respect to your first question, I think is greatly diminished. My sense is from your conversation, it makes sense to have the ability to appeal both. As I read that, however, it talks about whether or not the segment meets the criteria set forth in section B. So I defer to Corp Counsel, who's not here, but my initial inclination is to say, as I read that no, it would just be an appeal as to whether or not the criteria are relative to 1,500 cars per day, or if it's outside the boundaries of the MPO. I don't know, Jim, if you had a different sense on that.
My intent was that you could, first off, I want to back up on one other one. The biennial, the reason for the biennial review is the traffic counts are done every biennial, so that's the reason for the biennial review. Back to your other one, my interpretation of it is that your question about being for the appeal is for both opening up segments. So if somebody doesn't like if somebody comes forth and brings Highway E, for your example, from Man Road up to the next side road, if they don't like that, they could appeal that to administration. Correct.
Okay. Now, just so I've lost, I think Supervisor Robinson had his hand up first, and then Supervisor Johnson's in queue.
I think if you look at the language in B, it says other factors relevant to public safety. It is not and. So it is not a mutually exclusive language when you look at it. And I think it also triggers, it gives discretion to the county commissioner. It basically what triggers the review is if during the biennial review, the commissioner may consider other factors. So I would interpret that language as giving discretion to the commissioner to go both above and below, but I think you need to read it as written in the word or versus the word and is an exclusionary versus an all-inclusive.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we need to keep in mind and remember that the whole reason that, well, a few months ago I said, why don't we just make a map so we're done with it, so we're not taking Commissioner Griesbach's time up with over and over with a half-a-mile segment here and 3/4 of a mile segment there. And as a practical matter, I think that this does accomplish that. You know, we're going to have vastly expanded roadways, and if there are specific segments, there's going to be very few of them that are going to come before the commissioner for any review. I just don't see that as being a common everyday occurrence. I do believe there is a mechanism because of the language, because of the wording, that if someone wanted to, quite frankly, you better have a compelling reason after we've expanded to this degree to get it open. I think this fits the needs of just about everybody, and I will be supporting the option B, and I think we should adopt it and move it on. We've talked long enough, and it can always be revisited. Nothing in county government is carved in stone. This is a good workable solution, and I think we should adopt it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we have Supervisor Gums wishing to speak again.
My question is, Madam Chair, is why, is it because it's an ordinance, it just can't come back to the committee when someone, rather than the commissioner making the decision, why can't the committee do its blessing on that? We will have different, they will have different commissioners in the future who might not be liking this type of thing. And the committee members, remember, are the people that are voted on by the public. But it's because it's an ordinance that it has to go that way?
Who would like to speak to that?
As your administrator, we can draft an ordinance however you want it. Having gone through, I can give you the rationale as I recall the committee's discussions 2 years ago, was to move away from the process that you referenced where the committee was the arbiter of what sections should be opened or closed, and instead institute an ordinance that provided policy, direction to staff in terms of operations, and then staff would implement the policy adopted by the full board. But we can the direct answer to your question is we can draft an ordinance however you want it, but that's a question for you. Are you going to be involved in setting policy or essentially operations of which segments are open or closed?
Thank you. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to call the question on option 2 being sent to the full board.
All right. Is there,
Second that.
we have a motion and a second, having the question called. Any opposition? Okay, yes, okay. I'm a little rusty on the Roberts rules. Do I need to ask for a vote on that? Remind me, or do we just, okay, no. All right, no objections, thank you. All right, thank you for your patience with that. So, question has been called. Excuse me, just one moment. No, not at this point, Judy. The question's been called. So with that, are we wanting to do a roll call?
Roll call vote.
Okay, I was anticipating, all right. So with that, question's been called. We have a motion and second on the floor, and Kendra will call the roll.
Dickinson,
Oh, have I,
Just want to be clear, this is for option B, is that correct?
yes.
correct? Thank you for the clarification, yes. Kendra?
Johnson?
Did he vote?
Oh,
Yes.
I thought he was saying yes. That's not to me.
Yes.
Okay. Gums,
Yes.
Robinson?
Aye.
Styler?
Yes.
Christensen?
Aye.
All right, so the motion passes. Supervisor Robinson.
I think that there's merit in creating that task force to look at where we're going with ATV trails and the whole issue of connectivity and how it impacts us. And I think that there is merit in that, but I think we might want to take some time to study that, and that would also involve potentially the Parks Department and others, but that whole issue of how are we using our resources in terms of public lands and connectivity. So I would ask that we place this item on the agenda for a future meeting for additional discussion. I think if, you know, what triggered me into supporting the changes was the number of vehicles that are registered in the county with close to 16,000. So I think that it would be in our interest to look at where we're going long-term and how do we develop routes and how do we promote that and let others benefit from that. So I would ask that for a future meeting, we place that on our agenda.
So noted. Thank you, Supervisor Robinson. And I'd like to echo some of those comments. It's very clear that the public has spoken and has shared with us their interest in having more places to ride. And that is very important to hear from the public and their interest in making Marathon County more prosperous by creating more economic development. So to that and the idea of a task force to take a look at a long-range comprehensive plan of a trail system, which again would not be an easy thing to create, but it's worth looking at to hopefully create a regional type of system that would make Marathon County a wonderful destination where people can get off the roads. Because quite frankly, I do have a concern about the safety. And I did hear comments today from supervisors about the ability to tweak or revisit. And so the idea of having the ordinance in place now, so we hope that all goes well. But I absolutely support Supervisor Robinson's suggestion of having a look at a task force and putting that on next month's agenda, so thank you. Supervisor Dickinson.
Just to add to that comment, my comment before about the task force wasn't to reject that idea, but the comment was about having some task force to analyze all of this that we just discussed. I think the idea of having a task force or having a group to analyze how we're going to have ATVs move about the county like we do snowmobiles, with the government getting involved to some degree, but also having ATV clubs contributing to that about where they want to be able to move, I think is a great idea, because it does go right into that idea of what is the vision of the county for our residents and for those who would be traveling here and spending money here. Thank you.
Okay, so noted, thank you. Well, thank you all, and now we will move on to number 6, educational presentations and committee discussion. 2008, well, excuse me one moment, with the committee's indulgence, Vice Chair McEwen, who heads up and is shepherding the strategic plan, had a commitment today that he could not change. He is hoping to still be here, but he would be late. So with your consent, if we could put A down at the bottom, and we would go on to 6B, the report from the Highway Commissioner Griesbach. Yes, you were up. Okay, so we're going to hopefully wait until Vice Chair McEwen is able to join us, we'll have the discussion one way or the other, but better if he can be here. So Commissioner, if we could have you up on 6B.
So it was not a surprise to me when I seen that the general transportation aids did take a dip for us in 2022. And I just want to touch on things that we had discussed earlier, and a few of us had conversations with Tim Ramberg regarding the GTA. We figured it was going to take a dip. I just brought along a few numbers here for the 2022. Our submitted cost last year was about $12.8 million. The share of cost from the DOT also has dropped from the previous year from 19.9% to 19.73%. If we just go back a few years, again, it's a complicated formula, but it's based a lot of it on your 6-year expenditures. So if I just go back a few years, again, what we submitted for last year was $12 million. The previous year was $14.9 million. In 2020, it was $13.4 million. A year before that, the 2017 submitted cost is almost about $15 million. So you can see the reason for the dip in it. We should see back to an uptick because in 2015, we had submitted almost $20 million worth of costs with the reconstruction of Highway E outside of Marshfield. So that is one of the reasons we had talked to the committee earlier about bringing up a few projects to move our GTA up. So what we have coming up here that will help us is this current year, we are working on 4 redecks on bridges in the tune about $1.3 million. In our upcoming schedule in 2022, we have 3 bridges, 1 bridge on County Trunk Highway A of $1.1 million, and 2 bridges on Highway K, both estimated at $1.2 million. In all, between 2022 and 2026, our bridge program alone is around $10 million, which 20% of that cost would be ours, so we're about $2.1 million of cost there. Another project we have coming up in 2023 is a reconstruction of Highway K. Right now, that's estimated about $7 million, and we are going to be receiving funds from STP Urban, safety funds, rural, and multimodal in the tune about $4.3 million. So the remaining about $3 million are going to be direct costs to Marathon County. So after this year, we hopefully will be seeing back an increase into our GTA as long as the state funding remains the same and the share of cost does not keep going down. When this was all developed, when the share of cost came out, the goal was to have 30% share of cost. And right now, I said we were at 19.09, I believe it was, for next year. At 19.7 we are for next year. So the share of cost keeps going down. So it is very important that we do keep doing improvements to our roads. And one thing that I hope that the full board remembers is, once in a while, some counties will say, well, our GTA went up $300,000, so let's just slash highway budget $300,000. That doesn't help the cause. It's just going to make you go farther down that road. So I just wanted to kind of give you a quick update where we are with the GTA as far as we're down this year, but we hope to recover here soon.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Are there any questions for the Commissioner on that report?
May I also add that, we had talked about a while back about getting projects shovel-ready, because when the state or federal government does decide on the next transportation bill, when they say you have a project ready, I want to say, here's a project. When they say you have any more, I want to say, here's another project. When they say you have another one, here's another project. So right now, besides the bridges that I had talked about, we also have in there Highway G and Q, a safety plan, Highway H from N to 29, Highway C from J to I, Highway J from 153 to 29, Highway X from 153 to Wood Road, and Highway T from the county line to Highway 97. Those are all projects that are in design right now, so we hopefully have them ready to roll when and if any federal state money comes.
Supervisor Robinson.
Jim, thank you for that update. And I just want to stress the importance of this committee being the advocate for that balanced approach over that 6-year average for highway aids. A couple of years ago, under former Administrator Carger, we received a $193,000 cut in general transportation aid, and his initial response was to cut highway projects by 193. And I was in Supervisor Seiler's position then, and I said, you don't want to do that because it will haunt you for 6 years. And one of the things that we're trying to do that we is work through the North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission to develop that sustainability plan, to look at when we should be making investments, how those investments should be made, when we should be doing seal coating to try to extend it, but to bring some consistency to our expenditures so that we don't have these ups and downs on the general transportation aid. We can't control what other counties can do. We can control what we can do, but it's really imperative that we try to get to a reasonably level of funding to protect us from increases and decreases in the general transportation aid. So compliments to the staff and others for working on this, and the administrator for reflecting that in the budget.
Yes. Well said, Supervisor. Thank you. Administrator?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to that list that Jim provided, and as Supervisor Robinson referenced, that is in the budget. So if you look to the packet that was posted for the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee meeting that was held yesterday, on page 19 of the budget message, or page 41 of the packet, depending on how you want to count pages, there is an overview of our highway paving and bridge program plan for next year, and all of those projects that Jim referenced are listed. So if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Jim or myself about our if you have specific questions about projects, talk to Jim. If you have a general strategy question about budget, you can reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will move to 6C, the Broadband Task Force, update on efforts to expand service. Supervisor Robinson.
I think this is going to be redundant with item A in context of the strategic plan. So,
Okay, well, why don't we just put a couple of those together if you would like.
okay, so I just wanted to update you. We have a number of things that are in the work. We are still awaiting word from the Public Service Commission relative to the grant applications that were submitted. There was an oversubscription for the $100 million by about 4 times. We supported grant applications on the part of Bug Tussle, County Wireless, Serenity, and Charter. And in addition to that, Frontier submitted 3 separate applications for the Marshfield area, town of Texas, and in the Berlin-Hamburg area without us. And then there was one that did some connectivity to, ran through the county servicing Lincoln and Oneida counties. So we are waiting word. We should know the end of this month, early November, as to the success of those. In addition, we have the National Transportation Telecommunications and Information Act, where we submitted the application with Charter. The county was the applicant. We anticipate hearing something yet in the next couple of months. We also have, we'll have later this month a final resolution relative to our partnership with Bug Tussle relating to the conduit bonding, working with Fond du Lac County and other counties to pool the money to move ahead. We are trying to finalize those agreements, the access agreement, the memorandum of understanding, or the memorandum of agreement. Bond counsel and legal counsel are reviewing those, and we will have a presentation hopefully next week for that. We're in the process of trying to also, from the HR Finance and Property Committee, begin the process of identifying what our priorities should be under the American Rescue Plan Act. And one of the eligible activities is broadband expansion, and we heard repeatedly from in every one of our meetings how important that was, and we will be trying to clarify what our role will be and how we might leverage those dollars and work with other units of government. I know that next week, Steve Schneider is planning to be at the Eastern Towns Association, meet with them. We do have a plan from Bug Tussle relative to where they're proposing to lay the fiber, where the connectivity is, and I think he's looking to work with local governments to make sure that we're getting access to the right spots.
Thank you, John. Do we have any idea what kind of dollars we're talking about with that American Rescue Act for broadband expansion?
We do not at the present time.
Okay. When do we know when we might have some indication of how many dollars are available?
Well, I think it's going to be dependent upon what the need is. We also have the Rural Development Opportunity Fund. You have both Charter and LTD, which were awarded dollars from the Federal Communication Commission. They are to expand areas to the north and basically to the west on the western side of the county. It doesn't make sense for us to throw dollars into areas that are already covered. So we don't know what the needs are right now. I think the concern that I would have going forward as we look at, from a strategic plan perspective, is what areas are underserved and likely to continue to be underserved if the projects that we currently have in the works are funded. The concerns are communities such as Gunther and Harrison, which are more rural, sparsely populated, which makes it difficult to get that return on investment, and understand that the internet service providers either look for connectivity, how are we connecting something and running fiber through an area to get to another area, or serving a population. So I think we're going to have to, the Broadband Task Force is going to be spending its time on trying to identify where those gaps might be, and that's when we'll decide what sort of role the county might have going forward. But at this time, there's much in the works. I know that there are discussions between Bug Tussle and LTD about potentially partnering and doing joint ventures on the expansion of that into that RDOF area, which is a gigabyte service. And there are advantages to both because there's that connectivity of the fiber to light up the system. So I think the challenge is for us going forward from the strategic plan perspective, where are our underserved areas? What is the timeline for expansion? Are there opportunities for us to accelerate timelines, because the RDOF is a lengthy process, whereas the other grants are relatively shorter in duration in terms of if awarded, you must perform. So those would be the challenges. The other challenge from the strategic planning perspective that we need to do is we need better transparency from the perspective of where the fiber is located. Charter and Frontier in particular are relatively closed relative to sharing information on where their fiber is. Other companies are much more willing to share that information. It makes it difficult to look at that issue of connectivity. How do we connect fiber to expand services? And so I think we'll be looking at, can we request legislation? I know that Senator Baldwin was here for a broadband meeting talking about that issue of transparency. If they receive public funds, I think there should be a public disclosure where that fiber is so we can connect into it and make better planning decisions moving forward. Also, on that, the Metropolitan Planning Organization has been looking at the issue of the Dig Once policy, which is again another issue for our strategic plan. The purpose of the Dig Once policy is to communicate with utilities in advance of projects so that they coordinate utility placement so that we're not ripping up new roads to extend utilities in the future. There's some interest in the metropolitan area. The most interest is in the city of Wausau, where TDS is aggressively expanding. services and creating workload for the utilities. But we think that it would be worthwhile to try to get a better form of communication between the internet service providers and other utilities. And these are the projects that are coming up. If we do this road improvement, we don't expect you to come in. Other communities have basically put a permit fee in. Their permit fees are based upon the age of the road that they're disturbing. So the newer the road, the higher the permit to get them to cooperate. And I think that there's a great deal of room for improvement in that area and coordinating with utilities. And again, some of that is, what we're finding is that some of the information we're getting is 20 feet off, and 20 feet off on a fiber line is significant. And so we need more accurate information, and we'll be working with that. But Eric Libman from the city is very interested in this. Melinda Osterberg from the University Extension, when she was there, was working on the Dig Once policy, and we're continuing to look at what other communities are doing and how we can improve those communications with the utilities. So again, we're waiting for word of the awards. We're waiting for final award of the Rural Development Opportunity Funds to Charter and LTD. That's based on financing and other things, but once those awards are finalized, we can proceed, and we'll know what potentially the role of the county will be to either accelerate those projects and or fill in the gaps.
All right, thank you. Well, I would say that from your reports, actually, Chair of the Broadband Task Force, Supervisor Robinson, that we've made significant progress on addressing outcome measure 1 of Objective 8.7. So thank you for that report. And we'll combine. So at this point, we are going to move ahead to 6D because we do have Director Jerry Klein on deck with updates from the CCIT Director. So, Mr. Klein, if you're ready, we're ready for you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I just want to talk a little bit about what's in our budget for 2022 for changes. So we did a pretty significant investment in cybersecurity last year. We bought a couple of new products. We had our first staff position that's dedicated as what I call a security practitioner. For 2022, we're going to continue with some additional security enhancements. Excuse me. We're planning to implement 2 other tools. Last year we did the Albert monitoring tool, and we did Varonis. We have enhancements we're going to do with Varonis this year. And then we have penetration testing with a third party we want to plan to use in 2022. And then in the second quarter of this year, adding another security practitioner. Outside of security for 2022, we eliminated a programmer position, and we are anticipating using the funds for that to have a project manager. We only have 1 full-time project manager right now, and then we have about 50 projects we've been requested to do. We're actively working on about 25, and we're desperately in need of more project management. We are also implementing improvements to our project prioritization process. We have funding in our budget for Team Dynamics, which is a project management portfolio tool. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry, some sinus drainage. We will be implementing the project manager position, and then Team Dynamics will be bringing that product in. That will be a full suite tool of changing our help desk software and a new project management portfolio tool. Lance is the project prioritizer for IT projects related to the county. We're looking at kind of revamping both with software and with policy the process for us prioritizing what projects we're working on. We have kind of just a continuous demand for new projects. So prioritizing as they come in is critically important. The prioritization process right now is Lance represents the county, Katie Rosenberg, of course, the mayor, represents the city, and then Tom Boutain represents North Central Healthcare when new project requests come in. We have, same as Lance put into the county budget, we put in a 3% hold in our, a 3% adjustment in our salary for continuing to implement our paper performance tool. In our 2022 budget, we are, the city county IT operates on the, as a rider on the city's health and dental plan. So we have a, our current placeholder in there for health and dental insurance is 6% increase in health and 5% increase in dental. And then let me just check here. A couple of other small things. We anticipate participating with the county in the salary survey. And if you were at HR Finance yesterday or are going to listen to that, you'll hear Lance talk about that in his budget proposal. Outside of any questions on 2022 budget, I have just a few other things I wanted to cover. Any questions on that?
No questions at this time, Jerry.
Okay, the other thing that's huge project we have going on is our enterprise resource planning. You guys have heard that because you approved spending on it in September. We are we just started our first meetings with Collaborative this week, and next week is most of the main project kickoffs for strategic planning for that. So that's a huge project for us, and it'll take a lot of resources from all across the county. We are continuing to implement Office 365. That's a two-step process. For most of the people, they get they go from the older Office suite to the current modern Office 365 suite, and then once we get everybody moved over to that, we're in the middle of that right now, and then we'll move everyone's mailbox over from our on-site mailbox to the cloud-based mailbox. As people get to the Office 365 suite, they also have access to Teams. And we're anticipating using that as our primary tool for work collaborating across teams internally. Let's see.
So
that's kind of it. Any questions for me on those projects?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Supervisor has a question for you.
Is the Office 365 something that will be available to us on our iPads?
No, it's you'll get the Outlook client. No, it won't be. It won't be available on the iPads, John. That's just for county employees.
What are we?
It's just for people with laptops and PCs. How about that?
I'm just trying to make it usable.
It's a pretty subtle change actually from the older, from like Office 2016 to Office 365. It's not a significant change. It's mostly about interacting with our calendaring tool. I hope that answers any questions you have. I'll take any other questions. Otherwise, we can move on to the next subject. Chair, Sandy.
Any other questions for Mr. Klein at this time? There are none at this time. Jerry, so thank you. And with that, committee, we will move back to 6A, the 2018-22 strategic plan. Based on the plan, what should the committee focus on for the remainder of this term? Vice Chair McEwen is very interested in hearing the committee's comments on where the committee has arrived at this time. Is there strong evidence that in the two areas where infrastructure has the lead, which is, as Supervisor Robinson just did the report on 8.7, and then our other lead is on 10.12. So for that particular, the 10.12, I've asked Commissioner Griesbach to bring us a little bit up to date to help provide a context for some committee discussion and input.
Thank you. We're right now, as far as pacer rating, our goal was to have an average rating of 7.0, which Kevin and I are going to be going out here in a couple of weeks to do this year's pacer ratings. But right now we're sitting about 7.2, so we're obtaining that. We're actually seeing a little, every time we do our pacer ratings, a slight uptick. So we're doing very well in that area. We also talked about our bridge ratings probably 7, 8 years ago, I probably had countywide, because we oversee both town municipals, all municipalities and our county bridges. I had probably about 40 bridges under 50. After this next cycle is done, I'm down to about 5. So our bridge ratings have come up greatly once we get these all constructed, which will be through 2026. The unfortunate part of the outcome measurement also talks about reducing crash rate 5% in Marathon County. We are working on that with our traffic safety plan that we just finished. We're addressing a few items with edge line rumble strips, a couple other concerns on bad intersections. We're taking a look at a few of those items, so we should see a downward movement on that. But the uptick in that was just not Marathon County, speaking both state and federal through the whole pandemic for some reason that nobody can really put their finger on. Nationwide, there was a great increase of traffic citations and fatalities and accidents through the whole nation, through the whole pandemic area. And so we are starting to see that level back out, and I'll be having my traffic safety meeting coming up here November 3rd, and we should have a report where we're sitting back. But the trend is starting to come back down, but we did see an uptick, unfortunately, in the last year and a half. Again, nothing unique to Marathon County. It was nationwide that had happened. But with that, people going back to work and other safety precautions we're putting in, and we should get back with our safety plan. We should see a downward movement in that area also.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Commissioner, have we still looking for land yet for a new shop and for anything? You know, I just keep thinking that Highway O looks about the best place to go out there. You got easy access on the highway there, and you got land out there.
The Highway O or U?
Oh, north of 29. You take that exit there. The city of Wausau's got sewer and water out to that Highway O out there, I think.
Yeah, the problem with that area is we want to stay relatively close to the flyover areas, and we're starting to get a little distance. The terrain in that area isn't real helpful for us. It's really hilly in that area. And to find a 40-acre parcel of land, we never identified one on our original map besides the county materials on south of Highway 29. And with that just being filled in, probably 30 feet of fill in there, I don't think that site would be the best place to be putting a shop along with the Rib River on the south side of that. So we continue our research on it. That's kind of going on top of my list. Those bridges I've been speaking about a couple times today, those applications are due on Friday. So when I finally get those all in, the site location kind of moves back up on top of my list again to continue and identify some spots.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at this time? Okay, so if Vice Chair McEwen were here, he'd be inviting input and comments from the committee. You know, his question is, given the role and the objectives that this committee was charged with as part of the strategic plan, you know, what have we accomplished in up to now? And are we satisfied, you know, is the evidence there to show that we've made improvement? And if not, as Commissioner just pointed out, you know, some reasons why not, then to take another look at, you know, really focus on what this committee would like to see happen in the next 6 months. That's the report he's looking for, because it appears he won't be able to join us anymore today, but for next month, when he would join us, that this committee would have some solid input for him on what they'd like to see take place. Is there a need to maybe change or some of the criteria or some of the things we looked at? That was another question he had, because he will be preparing for the next plan, and input from this committee is an important part of that. So with that, are there any further comments on this? So Supervisor Dickinson.
The only comment I was going to make is in reference to the automobile crash rate. I mean, that is that's something past year and a half shows that that's probably not something that we as a committee and we as a board can really change. So looking at the next plan, that's something we should revise that into what we can actually affect.
Good point. And that's exactly the feedback that he's looking for. Supervisor Johnson.
Yeah, I agree with Supervisor Dickinson, and I think a way to address that is taking that percentage out of there and just saying reduction of, because there's no way, because that's a goal. It's a goal. And as the commissioner said and reiterated by Supervisor Dickinson, that's a lot of those factors are outside of our control and our influence. So don't want to be taking credit or taking blame for something that we have nothing to do with or don't have the ability to influence. So maybe broaden that rather than putting a hard 5% in there. We'll work towards reducing.
Yes.
Thank you. I think this is good conversation, and, you know, you can put the blame for that on staff. I mean, we came up with these measures. We're trying to identify SMART goals, but this is good conversation. I'm trying to get to the root of the issue with the measure. It strikes me that based on, I think Supervisor Dickinson, to your point, we can't necessarily drive the crash rate and also the timeline. I mean, the idea that we're going to reduce 5% crash rates by the end of 2022 is ambitious is the word that comes to mind, but perhaps unreasonable is better. Having drafted this plan in 2018 or been one of the drafters of it, I know in some other areas we used measures that, outcome measures that required us to take an action by a date to affect in the hopes of affecting a goal at a later date. I've heard the committee over the last several terms, and safety is certainly a big part of what we're aiming to do with our highway system. Does it make sense, perhaps, and I'm just looking for feedback, does it make sense perhaps to have a requirement that highway commissioner staff or that administration staff, we seek out to make a roadway improvement or the development of a plan in the hopes of improving highway safety by a certain date? Because I think, to your point, the feedback we're getting is we're not going to be able to accomplish, we're not going to define success by crash rates by a date. Sorry, that was long and rambling and not articulate, but I'm trying to identify what is the actual outcome measure that you're looking for, because you're the policymakers and this is a policy document. How are staff supposed to take direction?
Supervisor Robinson.
So we recently adopted the safety plan. Perhaps one of the triggers would be implementation of various components of that. So that would be, I think, if you wanted to look to that, whether it's the rumble strips or other things.
We have begun implementing some of those already. One of those plans, that plan showed the Highway Q and G intersection as one of our most dangerous intersections, and that's we're already drafting up plans. We've already started putting in rumble strips. So as a plan goes, we have developed one and adopted it this summer, and now we're starting to implement those.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I agree with that approach because I recall the presentation from Brown County about the impact that the rumble strips had on their crash rate on certain segments, and it was significant. So I don't want to be seen as saying that we have no influence over it, because we do. And that's a concrete step that I believe we can take, is implementing new strategies, because 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't think we were looking at it as analytically as we are now on where we're putting those rumble strips and what kind of positive effect in lowering the rate we can have. So I think we just have to be continually on the lookout for new strategies, new technologies, or old technologies with a new application to enhance the safety of the roads. So I just didn't want to be saying, oh, we have no influence, so let's not, because I don't believe that's the case. I think there are concrete things we are doing and can do and will be in the future, ones we don't utilize right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further input? So on behalf of Vice Chair McEwen, there's a lot of material in your packets, and I know some of it you may have found interesting. Some may not have appealed to you as much, but it was to give everybody an opportunity to see how other committees are doing things and to give you information. What Vice Chair McEwen is actually looking for, and in addition to this, thank you, very valuable input, is to find a way to document and also for the committee members to take some ownership, and whether we want to have our own legal pad or we make a copy of this template for our committee would just be 2 sides of 1 page, and jot down notes, and that we, on a regular basis on the agenda, not just when he visits, really take a look at these things to see if we're making progress and be able to provide the kind of feedback that you shared today. This was very valuable, and I will encourage Vice Chair McEwen to take a look at the recording so he can hear all of your comments. Thank you very much for all of that. I appreciate good comments, good input. And with that, we will move to number 7, announcements. And I'd like at this time, on behalf of the committee, to extend our condolences to Supervisor Gumbs on the loss of his brother, Robert, known as Bob, a friend to dairy farmers in Marathon County for many years as owner of Bob's Dairy Supply. So he was well known and he'll be missed. And again, our condolences to Supervisor Gumbs and his family. And future meetings and agenda items. Number 1. Oh, Supervisor Johnson, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. I just wanted to let folks know, anyone who is listening or in the room, if you've ever had an interest in learning how to curl, because winter's coming up, we have the Learn to Curl for those who are uninitiated and wanted to always give it a try, happening this Saturday. Go to wausaucurling.org. It'll give you the details. You get a full day of instruction, lunch, free beer. And if you like it, you join the club. If you don't, we say thanks for coming. So if you're interested or ever wanted to give it a try, check it out. Thank
Sounds
you, ma'am.
intriguing. Thank you. And with that, I've just been notified that Supervisor Gumbs would like to speak. Supervisor Gumbs, are you on the line yet?
I guess I am. I do thank you for your condolences. I didn't know I needed to speak, though.
Oh, we thought,
Technology.
okay. Looks like your hand was up from the last time, but again, okay, thank you. So now we are on 7A1, the November 4th, 2021 monthly committee meeting, so noted, and we'll be here again at the regular time. Number 2, North Central Region Fall Meeting, October 29th, and would that be responding to you, Commissioner?
That would be the legislative breakfast at the Holiday Inn in Stevens Point. We will have a quorum, so we'll send out an agenda here for that meeting.
All right, thank you. Number 8.
Do we have to do anything if we're planning on attending or just show up?
You had mentioned last time you were there, so you're all registered and ready
Cool.
to go.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Number 8. Oh, we have another hand, okay. We'll get everybody in. Supervisor Christensen. We have a motion, do we have a second? We have seconds, all in favor? All right, thank you everyone for your kind attention.
My problem is that doesn't want to let me in here. I can go to City Hall and I can get access to the system, same system.